Madam Chairlady, and a very good evening to you. A good evening to my colleagues, a good evening to the ministers of the Council of Ministers, a good evening to everyone. Madam Chairlady, those of you, and I guess that includes all of you, know me well enough to know that I love a budget debate. I loved it when I sat on the other side of the aisle. I loved it in whatever capacity I sat on this side of the aisle, whether it is being part of the government or not. I just love a budget debate. I love the budget handling of the country. And so, Madam Chairlady, let me start by expressing my thanks to the ministers for presenting their budget, and by doing so, present the budget 2025 in the month, actually of December. It was presented in December. We started the handling in December, and we now continue in the first month of the year, January 2025. There has been a lot of talk in the meeting regarding whether the budget is acceptable by some, whether it's an optimistic budget or not. The optimism expressed by members of the Council of Ministers, I share that optimism because I believe as leaders of this country, regardless to the circumstances, we need to be able to take on our responsibility and lead with hope and determination. So I share that optimism, but at the same time, very, very cognizant of the realities faced by this government. What those realities are became quickly evident by a very short note of amendment presented by the Minister of ECYS. And what needed to be done in order for that ministry to acquire a few or be able to fill a few functions was actually to, from the same budget, cut some posts of projects and other such programs of that ministry, because there is not much wiggle room in the budget. But I believe to confidently make the next steps, we need to know where we stand today and where we've come from. So not going too far back, in the latter part of 2023, as we were approaching the end of the former governing term 2020 to 2024, we all readied ourselves for the elections of January 2024. For us, and in this case I speak of the Democratic Party, that was after having sat out elections for approximately 8 years. A colleague of mine earlier referred to the year 2024 and indicated that the majority of the government now, in the next couple of months, would have been in office for a year. Really? January 2024 election. And I don't even want to go back to June 2022, because I believe that was a turning moment in that government, 2020 to 2024. Elections, January 2024. A new parliament sitting in February 2024. The government, which I supported, taking office on the 3rd of May. By the 20th of May, that government was informed that they no longer had a majority, only within the next couple of days to be told that that majority was reestablished. And in the meantime, elections were called. And so we had elections again with everything that happened between that date and the elections of August 2024. Can anyone really say that members of this government in the next couple of months is going to have a year in government and a year of governance? The last time the Democratic Party participated in an election was in the year 2016, at which time we formed part of government and ironically were booted from that government because of the disagreement regarding the funding for the recovery following Hurricanes Irma and Maria. And it is apparent to everyone, and it will become more apparent, that that funding was a blessing in disguise for every successive government. Because imagine for a moment that the governments over the years did not have the trust fund projects and the NRPB structure. And I give that piece of history to fast forward to January 2024, in which election we did participate, and along with 3 other parties on the basis of a program set out to govern this country, only to be undermined a couple of months later, following the January 24 election. How that entire year turned out is history. But what I do know is that the government agreed in January 2024 on the basis of a governing accord that included some fundamental and recurring issues. Some of these have been restated in the coalition accord that governs this current cabinet, Marcelina, and the ministers before us today. The other fundamental issues have been left to be worked out in the government's program, the governing program, in collaboration with the ministries and the plans already at the ministries. And that would be the way, seems like the way to go. I want to mention just a few of the items that were agreed to in the coalition of the URSM, PFP, the NOW, and the Democratic Party, because we didn't even get a chance to share that agreement. Matters such as the creation and establishment of a national development bank, the principles of tax reform, health screening, and addressing the use of tobacco and narcotic products in our society, addressing addictions, expansion of home care, health services, mental health, the orange economy, a specific St. Martin economic identity, regional cooperation in the area of security, economic development, transportation, and food security, as well as climate change. We agreed on an urgent Kingdom conference to address, among other items, the democratic deficit, the debt position of St. Martin, the right to sustainable development and self-government, and as part of nation building, the status of the English language. Poverty, decentralizing certain tasks to community councils to be the bridge between community residents and government services. A new way of looking at investments and investors to include corporate social responsibilities. We wanted to address the University of St. Martin's concerns related to the Ordinance on Higher Education. We spoke about a special development policy plan that addresses environmental challenges, public-private partnerships for housing, an environmental and nature protection authority, a solid waste authority, and cross-border initiatives. As I mentioned before, several of these policy initiatives and visions reappear in the coalition agreement of August 2024. However, this government, the 7 ministers sitting before us, faces a huge task, nearly, and some would want to say, impossible task. Because under the current circumstances, it is difficult to move from where we are in a sustainable way. Firstly, we had to out some big fires, fires that were left simmering for years before this government took office. Our budget, in its current form, leaves very little room for growth. This one, the one before it, and the one before that, and the one before that. It is not new what we are facing today. What is new is that this government is owning up to it, that is the situation before us. I am of the firm belief that we will never, under the current circumstances and regulations, reach at a point where the CFT is no longer necessary because we would have fulfilled the balanced budget criteria, not in this day and age. We cannot 1 minute be considered equal and share kingdom responsibilities in this same budget. Other times we are patronized, and then other times we are ridiculed. And you have heard it from all our ministers in their presentations. So there is no lack of plans, there is no lack of vision, but there is not capacity, and there is no additional money for that capacity. And then, of course, as also acknowledged, we lack data. In 2020, December 2020 to be exact, after a lot of playing the cat and mouse game with the Dutch government, we were forced to accept the country package that was already designed for Curaçao and Aruba, an opportunity lost for us to be the initiators of the country package that we are executing today. So the TWO, there are many reports in the Central Committee meetings of Parliament. I refer to some of these reports. But what can we do with these reports without the resources to execute them, without the capacity to further implement them? And stand for, as a coalition, to have some type of a retreat and discuss ways and means for funding based on mitigating matters such as climate change and preserving the environment through sustainable energy sources and such. This type of topics resonate in the region. They resonate globally. I repeat them: climate change, debt financing, and small island development states. One rainfall and our budget for upgrading of roads could be depleted, and we still would not have dealt with structural infrastructural improvements. A retreat, in my mind, that would include public-private partnerships for example, housing. A retreat that would include a come-broad approach towards the Dutch government. Because while our debt position might not be that bad, a great portion of these debts, of these loans, is non-productive. A lot has been said about our health system and universal health care and the general health insurance. And we need to ask ourselves, can we, for the long term, carry our health system based on our scale, our health profile, and our aging population? Another discussion to be had now: are we sufficiently utilizing our EU relationship and citizenship? Or are we again facing lack of capacity to go after that source of funding with a strong determination? These are not easy questions, and not questions that one single person or even two or three have all the answers to. But what I do believe, ministers, and I am convinced of, is that there are sufficient persons here on St. Martin who can give advice and are willing to support this endeavor. There is always, of course, the ongoing or the going concern. And at this time, we do not have the luxury to take our overburdened management in government So those who can do this kind of work and put them to research and collaborate and draft some of out-of-the-box approaches that we need to apply. Yes, we need legislation, but even the legislation that we have can't be enforced because of the lack of capacity. This country of St. Martin is not the lawless country that some people would like to portray it as. But we don't have sufficient control to enforce our laws as they are. So again, I want to encourage the ministers to not just have a theoretical exercise of drafting a governing program that will end up on the shelf somewhere, like so many before it, but rather to have that retreat by whatever name you wish to call it. Right now, we need a quick assessment of our national economic profile, because until now, we keep getting it in bits and pieces from the IMF, from the CBCS, from reports commissioned by the TWO. So much to do. And when it comes to budget, so little room. It's from the IMF, from the CBCS, from reports commissioned by the TWO. So much to do. And when it comes to budget, so little room. I encourage the government to make the district and community council concept part of the governance framework, part of the decentralized governance for this country. Our Minister of Finance stated it correctly. So I don't understand the discussion about taking over from previous budgets or bringing the same budget here to Parliament. A policy-neutral budget. You want a more realistic approach to what we have before us as a budget? Those words were expressed by the Minister of Finance. So from the coalition agreement to which I referred earlier to a governing program, finances will continue to be scarce. And so what is therefore extremely important is to temporize expectations, take small steps, seek incremental successes based on the outline of this government's vision and priorities. Communicate also, and I believe especially to Parliament, so we can be your ally in advancing some of your efforts.